Hey everyone, here to the basics of ephemeral entities with regards to Magic the Awakening. A few people have asked for this video, and I'm calling this the basics because I'm sure there'll be certain cases that are missed, and from people's questions, I'll do a follow-up video. So to start with, ephemeral entities are creatures that don't exist in the material world per se, not physically. So these include spirits, supernal beings, Genosha, and ghosts. So, some of these creatures have their own domain, some do not. When they're in the material world, they're in a state of twilight, if they can even manage that. Things like Goetia and supernal beings can struggle with that without being properly summoned by a mage. But spirits and ghosts exist in a state of twilight where they start to bleed out essence unless they do something. That's the very basics of that. Spirits belong usually in the Hyssal, which is kind of like the shadow world across a gauntlet when they're not in Twilight. Ghosts exist in Twilight naturally or the underworld. Goetia are in the astral plane unless they're summoned down here or brought in through other means. And supernal beings are summoned from supernal realms. So, these are all the basic creatures that are ephemeral. There are other cases or subtypes to these creatures, but that is not for today's video. Point 2, essence. Essence is like a spirit's mana or food supply, as it were. They spend essence to do all sorts of things, from bolstering their basic stats to powering their Numera and influences. Essence itself is basically a food resource. Different entities get this in different ways. Ghosts get it from being around their anchor or dredging up memories of its past and finding relatable things. Spirits do so through consuming other spirits or being around its resonance. Now that's an interesting term, resonance. Resonance are emotions or feelings that are kind of released in the material world. So when someone is murdered, resonance of murder begins to inflict the area. Dogs create a dog resonance if they frequent a spot. Stuff like that. This is very important for when we get into some other things later based on the creatures. So yes, essence is their food and fuel supply. Influences. Most ephemeral creatures have something they influence. This can be looked at almost as if lesser spheres of magic from a mage's point of view. It costs them essence to attempt to. They use their power and finesse on a dice roll, and they try and reshape or direct the essence that they control. Now, at different levels, they can do different things. For example, if someone has only one in this influence, it can do very little other than nudge things along. At 3, they can tend to control things drastically, very much like Mage magic. At 4, they're able to create the situation. If it's an emotion, instilling an emotion. If it's like a dog, it can create a small animal from nowhere. And then 5 is mass creation, where they can do this at a much larger scale. So that kind of covers influence to a certain degree. Continuing on. It's not on our list, but Bans and Banes. These ephemeral creatures, since they don't exist in the material world, as a trade-off, they tend to have Bans and Banes. Bans are things they cannot do without causing themselves harm or getting them sent back to the world they belong. And Banes are things that inflict aggravated damage on their corpus that it's incredibly hard for them to heal. Tying back in with our essence, as long as an ephemeral being has willpower or essence, or what's it called, its corpus, it will live. So you can destroy these beings, they may come back. Of course, there's exceptions to all these rules. Ghosts can be eaten by geists. Spirits can be eaten by other spirits or werewolves. Goetia can be consumed by the astral plane or void in a big enough shift or in someone's dream, stuff like that. Continuing down, we have manifestations. I had mentioned earlier that creatures bleed when they're over here. Manifestations are a way for either these ethereal entities to either connect themselves to this world so they stop bleeding off essence, take form in this world so they can interact with it directly, possess creatures, themselves to items so they stop bleeding essence. Familiar is a manifestation that mages make when they make a pact, cast the spell, and connect with that creature. Some are even powerful enough to open gateways to other realms, so across into the spirit world or pulling other beings into twilight. And most of these come with conditions connected to them. Continuing on to our last topic here, we have Numera. These are unique magical powers that spirits have. These are very much like as if you had your rotes, except you are limited to them. Spirits have specific abilities they can do. The ones in the book is not what it's limited to, and as a spirit grows in rank and power, they get more. That is not something I touched on. All these ephemeral entities are ranked in a power base. How they treat each other is different depending on the type of entities, but the rank determines its overall power. This will determine its core stats, the number of manifestations, the amount of influence and numera standardly these creatures have. Now, with all this said, this isn't getting into edge cases such as the claimed, or hosts are two subtypes of spirits, or other things that touch on in other game lines. Mages don't tend to know these things right away and learn and develop as they go. So with that, this has been a super brief explanation of ephemeral entities. There's a lot of information. I'm trying to compact it the best I can. If you have any specific questions, let me know. I'll collect them and do a follow-up film. But these are the basics. I don't think we touched on attributes though, so I probably should. So, these creatures, instead of having skills and attributes like a mortal living creature, they are all combined into 3 simple attributes: power, finesse, resistance. Everything they do is, if it was a mundane thing, would take 2 of these depending on what it was. Resistance covers things that would cover stamina, composure, resolve. Finesse covers dex, wits, and manipulation. And power covers strength, intelligence, and presence. With that, this has been the very basics of ephemeral entities. I will probably have to do a few more videos, but specific questions will help, or maybe even diving into specific entity types. Alright, all. I hope this has helped you and answered some questions, and more questions always help. Thank you for now. Bye.